and welcome to another very special episode of Menace and the Monk. And Stephen, or Babuyagu, as you already all know him on Twitter, has joined us for another chat. So, Stephen, let's dig right into it. And we are talking about the Liverpool midfield. One thing I think I don't know if you agree with this, but the heart and soul of our system, the way we press, the way we attack, the way we go back and win the ball in the middle of the park, the back or the up front as well. Maybe not as glamorous, but our midfield plays a very big part in that. And it sort of flies under the radar. But this season, because of the injuries and the things that have happened, that has been disrupted, and how we've had two of our best midfielders go and play in defense. I wanted to sort of pick your brain and understand what you think about how much it has affected the way we play, because people generally mention Van Dijk and Mane not being in form, or the front three. How much has the midfield disruption harmed us in this particular season?
Yeah, well, I've said in the past on Twitter, I kind of have like midfield myopia. So anytime there's a problem, I always look at the midfield to try and decide what the problem is. And then I kind of struggle to see anything else because I tend to just be very narrow focused. I always think the midfield is the engine room in football. And so if the car's not working, it's probably the engine. Let's look at the engine first. And so that's kind of the way I always think about football. But just to explain something very quickly, just as a sort of coverall, rather than focus on a specific team, I think there's four key tasks that every midfield has to be doing. That's protecting the defense, linking the play, penetrating, which is basically getting the ball from midfield into the final third to start the process of trying to score a goal, and then finishing, which is basically supporting the attack as far as the midfield is concerned. So you need to be doing those four things. And anytime you aren't doing one of those four things, you have dysfunction. And it doesn't mean that you can never win a game. You can't play football. It doesn't mean that. It just means that if the game goes in a certain way and you need to solve a problem that your midfield doesn't have the tools for, you're not going to solve the problem. So whenever you look at a midfield that has like Wijnaldum, Milner, and Henderson, there's dysfunction there. And so if the game is very open and you're counter-attacking and you have players running into space and you just need to hit them with the ball, that midfield can do that. But if it's facing a low block, it just can't. And so whenever it comes up against Napoli in Europe, for example, and Napoli are just sitting in a low block, then Milner and Henderson and Wijnaldum just don't have the tools for that. Yeah. And so I think that's the important thing people need to understand. First of all, is that the key thing is not having dysfunction. If you look at the great midfields, for example, AC Milan is always the one I always go to, but Pirlo is probably as good as you'll find at linking the play. And then you have Gattuso protecting the defense. Like the guy was just an engine on his own. Yeah. And then you have Kaka, which was penetrating and supporting the attack. And so every single one of those tasks is being done at a world-class level. And so people always focus on what players can't do, but the key thing is making sure those four things are covered with whoever you have in midfield. And I think that's the problem we've had this season, is that no matter if you're taking your players that are good at protecting your defense and put them in defense, you're not doing that anymore. But also in doing so, we also lost our defense's ability to link play whenever the midfield was being pressed. So people would push up on our team. We give it to Van Dijk and he just hits it over to one of the fullbacks, and that's it. They've solved the problem of linking play with the players on the pitch. And that's what we've lacked this season. And so that's going forward. We kind of have all the tools that we need. Like if you look at Curtis Jones, he's really good at supporting the attack and penetrating. Thiago's as good as you'll find in world football at linking play. Fabinho protecting the defense is excellent again. And so we have all the tools we need to do these things. The problem is whether we can get them all on the pitch at the same time. Because with Keita, that was obviously the idea was he would be the guy that's penetrating and supporting the attack, but he's just not on the pitch. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how good you are on paper. And then Curtis Jones is a young kid. You can't have the expectation that he solves the whole problem of your midfield on his own. for this kid who's only played maybe like 10 starts in the Premier League. So we probably need to sign someone that does those things. Maybe someone like OR, as I said
Yeah.
in the other podcast. But yeah, it's kind of like there's problems to be solved, and just signing Thiago doesn't solve everything. He's only one world-class part of a midfield that needs 4 parts.
But Stephen, you mentioned about the 4 parts, all right? But you mentioned the AC Milan team, which had those great midfielders. But the 3 great years that we had Fabinho playing majority of the games with Henderson and Wijnaldum. You mentioned the 4 things that they have to do. In Jurgen Klopp's system, do the 3 midfielders need to do all 4 things? Because are midfielders really good at penetrating the opposition defense or even finishing? Because I really don't think our midfield is there to score many goals or assist many goals because of our tactics. I think our fullbacks just bomb forward and at times our midfield sits behind. Do you really think the Jurgen Klopp system needs the midfielders to do all those 4 things that you mentioned?
Well, if you remember in the previous podcast when I was talking about Firmino, I said he's the number 10 in our system and that he's the guy that solves problems whenever there's a problem that the midfield can't solve. And that's what I was talking about. Basically, he's the guy that drops in the midfield and offers penetration whenever the midfield is struggling to do it on its own. It's not an ideal solution. Ideally, you want your midfield, your 3 in midfield, to have the solutions to the problems that they're facing, but it's a solution. But the thing I think a lot of people forget with Fabinho and Henderson is at the start of last season, up until Fabinho's injury, all the talk was about dropping Henderson for his form. He was playing really badly, and he was staying on the right a lot, and our midfield was kind of getting open quite a bit. He was getting in the way of Trent at times. He kept trying to play those balls from deep into the box, and nothing was coming from them, so he was just surrendering the ball a lot. And it wasn't until Fabinho got injured, and he took Fabinho's role, that that Henderson actually put up the form that saw him win the Media Player of the Year. And I think that Fabinho and Henderson can't be on the pitch together because they both need to be doing the same role. It's the thing they excel at. It would be like signing Xabi Alonso to play next to Pirlo. You're like, well, what's the point? You already have Pirlo. You don't need someone to. It's like, or signing Gattuso to play next to Mascherano. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
you're just so that's the thing I think with Henderson and Fabinho is that they both excel at doing the same role. I don't think Henderson's particularly good as an 8. He has a lot of limitations where if a game goes in a certain way, he kind of struggles as an 8. If he's getting pressed a lot, he tends to drift out onto the right. And that ends up opening up your midfield. And then Fabinho, who's very good at playing in a channel that's sort of concentrated, filtering the attacks into him, so he can break them up. That channel opens up more and more and more until he can't cover the ground anymore. And then teams can just run around him and make him look stupid. So I don't like Henderson and Fabinho on the pitch together. It doesn't mean they can't play together. It doesn't mean we haven't won games when they're together. It just means that there's a problem that they create by being on the pitch together. And it needs to be avoided if possible. You don't want to be putting weaknesses in your own team, giving the opposition things that they can easily exploit. So, and that's the thing. So you come down to like, it's either Fabinho or Henderson. It isn't those 2 together. And then it's who the other 2 are that solve the rest of the problems. I think another underrated thing we have with Wijnaldum that I think a lot of people miss is he's very good. One of the best I've seen really at running from deep. And that isn't always just to get the ball, but it's just to move things around. Right. So he'll run beyond Firmino, and the midfield either has to track him, which either gives you more space in midfield, or the defense has to track him, or you leave him, in which case he's free to get the ball. And he does that a lot, and he doesn't always get the ball when he does it, but he does it for the purpose of moving people around to create space.
Right.
And he's also very good at it sounds weird saying this because it's a criticism that people level, but he's very good at playing the ball sideways.
Yeah.
And the purpose of doing that is to open up the pitch again.
Exactly.
So if you look at the team and everyone's condensed in a block and they're all at one side of the pitch, then you want to move the ball quickly to the other side of the pitch and then move it back again to the other side of the pitch. And that'll naturally just open up spaces between the opposition's lines vertically. And so you need to do these things. You need to move a team around to open up spaces. And our midfield is very good at doing that. And Wijnaldum's good at running and attacking spaces whenever they appear. Sometimes he scored a few goals for us doing it, but usually it's just to move people around and create space. Especially if like Firmino's dropping into midfield, and then he's the one that usually plays the ball that makes that moves it into the finishing phase from midfield. So our midfield done the job. It can do better. Obviously Thiago's better at anyone else, probably in football, but anyone else certainly in our midfield at linking play. And so having him's going to take it up another level. But we are probably missing that guy that offers something like Gerrard, I guess. Like we all pine for Steven Gerrard, but yeah, it would be nice to have someone that could do what he could do.
Absolutely. And that's interesting, Stephen, that you mentioned Gerrard, because he added something else, and that leads on to my next question. Do you think this change in system, perhaps as we were discussing throughout this particular conversation and the other one as well, do you think we have to go for a creative midfielder? I mean, it doesn't have a clear definition, but someone who creates clear-cut chances, someone like may I say it, Coutinho. Does the system require someone like that?
Not really. Basically in football, you have things that your team needs to do.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really matter where it comes from. Your team just needs to be able to do it. So if your right back is able to create as many big chances in the season as the other team's central midfielder, then it doesn't matter. It's just, that's the thing. And then the question is, if you were to sign that central midfielder and put him in the same team, would you simply be adding what he does? Not really, because the midfield is probably being more defensive, so that the fullback can actually get forward and get into those positions. And so it isn't as simple as just simply adding a creative midfielder, because the system would need to change to accommodate it. And whether that means your fullbacks are deeper and therefore they're not creating as many chances or overloading the opposition's flanks, and that means maybe you don't have the same width, so your forwards need to stay a bit wider, which means they aren't going to score the same amount of goals. And therefore, maybe then your forward needs to change to more of a number 9, and that's the thing. You can't just change one thing. The whole system is built around doing a certain job, and everybody has functions in that system. And like, say for example, taking Firmino out, if he's your connector, you take him out, then you put in Haaland, say. Well, that's fine, but who's connecting things then? So then you need a connector, and then you have to change the whole system. So you need to put in someone like OR, for example, in midfield, and then, okay, that's fine. But now your midfield's very attacking, so now you need your fullbacks to be deeper, and now you have no width, and et cetera, et cetera. So everything has a knock-on effect when you make.
This is the time you would play Gattuso and Mascherano together, right?
Yeah.
But Stephen, you mentioned that teams need to do certain things. It doesn't matter who does it. Do you still have faith in Naby Keita? Can Naby Keita be that person who actually makes a difference next season in midfield? I know this is a question which has been asked probably 20 times already. But I mean, I personally want him to succeed so bad, but it's so frustrating.
Yeah. The thing I was saying about Harvey Elliott before in the other podcast about you can only judge a player on the level they're at. And so we saw Naby Keita at every level, from League 2, Salzburg, and then Leipzig. And he looked like a world-class midfielder. And then when he comes to the Premier League, he looks good when he plays and he's fit. And you can't really deny it. He's very, very good.
Yeah.
But if his body isn't physically able to sustain that, it doesn't matter. And it's the same with Daniel Agger. We had Daniel Agger years ago, and he was one of the best defenders I've seen, but he couldn't stay fit, so it just didn't matter. And you can't really build a team around someone if they can't be fit. And that's the problem with Naby Keita, is I think Jurgen Klopp is signing Naby Keita as his Kagawa or as his Gotza midfielder. It's going to be the guy he builds a team around. And then if he's not fit, you can't do that. So we kind of either need to replace him or we need him to stay fit. And your plan can't be for him to stay fit because it isn't happening at the moment. So you need to have another plan. We need to have another Keita. I would have no problem holding on to Naby Keita next season because I think he's the potential to be a total game changer for us. Like, he could take us up to another level. But the problem is, if you hold on to him and you don't have someone else that can do that when he's injured, or if he isn't able to do it, then you have a problem. It would be like Manchester United if Bruno got injured. Like, what would they do? Because they don't really have anyone else that does what he does, and he's instrumental. Everything goes through him. And it's the same with like Aston Villa when Grealish got injured this year. For like five games he was injured, but for those 5 games they literally looked like they didn't know how to attack. They literally had no idea what they were going to do with the ball. And that's the problem with having like a linchpin in your system. And I think that's what the idea was with Keita, was to build the midfield around him. That thing I was saying about evolving our midfield and Klopp targeting different types of midfielders in Henderson and Milner. I think that's the thing with Keita, is we're going to build the next evolution of the midfield around him, but he's injured, so you can't do that. And I don't know whether it'll be Curtis Jones. It's a lot of pressure to put on him. I don't know if we sign someone like Awar, or I don't know if we have an actual plan to get Keita fit. I don't think we can really rely on that. But
well, that's a very fair point, Stephen. And let's talk about the midfield, the options going into next year. Right now, we probably have Wijnaldum leaving the club. Milner and Henderson, as you mentioned, are getting older. Probably if we get a good bid for Oxlade-Chamberlain, maybe he'll be moved. There are rumors. You mentioned Hussein Mawar quite a lot of times, and there are also rumors about DePaul. Do you think there are any other midfielders out there, or even these two, that Klopp might be targeting? Do you have any names that you would really like to see at Liverpool?
I mean, there's lots of. I guess the problem is this season I haven't watched a lot of football that isn't Liverpool this season, because I haven't really enjoyed watching football as a neutral. I think the quality of football this season's just been really low, and so at the start of the season I was watching a lot of football and I wasn't really enjoying it, so I just stopped. So I haven't really been paying attention. So a lot of the names I'm saying, for example, like Awar hasn't had a good season from what I've read and from the highlights I've seen. And so it's kind of weird that I keep mentioning him, because people will be thinking he hasn't been very good this year. And that's the problem, is my thinking about football is probably like a year and a half ago, whenever I sort of last watched a lot of football. So it's kind of, but I mean, it's there'll be lots of people out there that do the same thing. There always is. There's never like a scarcity of players like that can move the ball from the midfield into the finishing phase. So and I'm almost certain, as with Fekir and everyone else that was mentioned before, like Zielinski, and I'm sure Jurgen Klopp has a list of like 20 names, and we're probably thinking about 2 of them. And it's always the case that the one that's getting mentioned the most is probably the one that we're not interested in, because we tend to keep everything under wraps very well until something's actually going to happen. So like Jota just came out of nowhere, and Fabinho was the same, just came out of nowhere. And the ones that sort of drag on are the ones where the player himself or the club, in the case of Bayern Munich, we're talking about us being interested in their player. So unless that's happening, I would suggest we're probably interested in someone that's not been mentioned. It might be someone like Brandt, for example, at Dortmund. I mean, there's loads. There'll be lots of people out there. Every team that's successful has 1 or 2 players that can do that job. Otherwise, they won't function. So there'll be lots of people out there, especially in League One. League One's sort of a breeding ground for that sort of player.
Right.
They sort of have a high turnover of players. They bring through lots of young players, and they move them on to the bigger leagues, I guess. So, and I guess the Dutch league's the same. So you look around those leagues and you find lots of players like that. Interesting. Donny van de Beek, who joined Manchester United,
Yeah.
is such a player. He's really good at that, but he hasn't been able to adjust to the Premier League yet. Again, it's that thing about adjusting to the level. So yeah, there'll be lots of players out there.
Got it.
I mean, I really, really like Fabian Ruiz from Napoli. I think he's someone that we could target, but I think probably the price tag will be something which could block that move. But Stephen, how ridiculous is it when you hear the fact that people say Thiago slows down everything and Thiago is not good for our system?
Yeah, just to explain this very quickly. People have this sort of weird idea that football is always fast, and not only is that not true, but it's also not what you want. The whole idea of football is.
But Steve, sorry to cut you short, but when you look
Sure.
at from an outsider's point of view, when you just watch Liverpool on the telly, it does look that it's really fast, right?
Yes and no. Whenever it's called there's basically different phases of play, and so the phase of play that Thiago excels in is the build-up phase and the circulation of the ball, or the consolidation. It's called so. And Gini Wijnaldum, again, that's where he excels, consolidating, keeping the ball, making sure the opposition don't have the ball.
Right.
And that's how you win the midfield battle. That's how you win games, basically, is if the opponent can't get the ball, and if you maintain control of the ball whenever you have attacks, and you're able to move the ball from there into the finishing phase and prevent the opposition from doing the same, then that you're winning the midfield battle, and therefore you're in control of your future in the game. And that's what we're aiming for. That's why you sign players like Gini Wijnaldum and Thiago. And so when you look at Thiago, what he's doing is he's moving the ball around, and it doesn't matter the speed of the play. All he's doing is moving the ball around for the purpose of waiting until there's a space for you to be able to exploit it. And then you move the ball into the finishing phase, and then your attack has to be quick because you have to exploit the space before the opposition can react to the fact that they've screwed up and left a space that can be exploited. And so that's what you're basically trying to do is if you think about when you have the ball, the opposition always want to have a spare man in defense. So you'll have like, say, one forward who's marked by two centre backs. One of them's free and the other one's kind of paying attention to the forward. And then everyone else on the pitch is kind of man for man. Even teams that aren't man for man marking it, it's kind of how it works out. There'll always be someone paying attention to someone who's near them, and you never want to have a free man in your forward line. So what you're trying to do as the attacking team is move your free man from being in defense, where the opposition probably has three forwards pressing your four defenders. You want to move that free man into a position you can hurt the opposition. And that's why that's why Firmino is so crucial to what we do, because his job is to move people around so that the defense has so many problems that they need to think about at the same time that they lose someone. There's someone they're not paying attention to. And it's the thing I was saying earlier about Wijnaldum making runs from deep. That's another example of that. You basically have a midfielder run beyond the forward line, and someone has to pay attention to that. Someone has to go with him. Someone has to leave him. Someone has to ignore who they're marking to follow him. And so all those things that you're doing, the sole aim is to try and move your free man into a position where you can hurt the opposition. And it doesn't matter if you're moving the ball slowly or quickly while you're doing that. It's just about waiting until that moment happens. Move the ball side to side to open up those spaces. Get runners who aren't even wanting the ball. So you'll see people run away from the ball, and you think, why is he running? No one's going to pass to him. Doesn't matter. Someone has to watch him. That's all it's for. And so that's what we're doing when we're moving the ball around. And I think a lot of people pay too much attention to these sideway passes or slow ball, passing the ball around slower in midfield. It doesn't matter. If you go back and watch like the best Milan side, the best Brazil side, it wasn't like instant passes, first touch every time. It was never like that, because that isn't what football's like. It's more like chess, where you're moving things around, waiting for a moment to go in for the kill.
Absolutely. And just to close things off, Stephen, just one last question. there are bound to be changes in our midfield next season. As we've discussed, we ought to see some new faces. Some of the midfielders will leave. Which midfielder? I mean, I sort of know the answer to this, but which midfielder do you think is an absolute certainty, and we need him in midfield next season for sure if we have to improve from this season onwards?
Fabinho. And that's kind of really hard because it goes back to that thing I said earlier where I said it's either Fabinho or Henderson.
Yeah.
Because they kind of both excel at doing the same job. But Fabinho's called in the club the lighthouse. And he's just so crucial that, like, whenever he's in midfield, there's also this other thing where he's kind of like a throwback midfielder, like a Graham Souness type, where he'll put a tackle in on the opposition's creative player,
right,
like at some point in the game, and the guy just thinks, yeah, I want nothing to do with that. I don't want to go near him again. And I've seen him like bully people so that they'll just stay out of his zone. So if you can get the creative players to like stay on the flanks and not really want to be near Fabinho, who's going to rack them with a tackle, that's great. That's what you want. And so he's so crucial to what we do. And it's in so many ways that you can't even tangibly describe it. There's so many things that he's important for us doing.
Right.
That when he's not on the pitch in midfield, we just don't look like the same team. We coped fine with him last season, by the way, with Henderson in there, because Henderson's also very good at doing those things. But I think Fabinho's like the best in the world at what he does. And yeah, that he would be my first name on the team sheet. And then after that, it's Thiago, because again, Thiago is probably like the best in the world at what he does. It's just finding that other. Who's the other? And I don't know who that is.
Yeah.
Stephen, this is going on so well. I just have to ask you one more question. Sorry, Nidhi, please forgive me. This becomes way too long. But Stephen, you mentioned about Thiago. We had a great discussion about him. I saw a few games, I think especially Leipzig away, where he played just behind the front three. For majority of the season, he's been playing in a deeper role. So many of our supporters want him to play in a more advanced position so that he can play a killer ball. According to you, what is Thiago's position? Is he the man is he the double pivot with Fabinho, or is he the one who is just behind the front three?
In terms of football, he would be described as a deep controller. So it's the thing I said earlier. The thing you want Thiago to do is to give you control of a game, to win you control of a game. And that's where he is at his best. And that's the job he's done for like 99% of his football career. Because he's a really good footballer, he's very technically sound. He can also do a job probably as a number 10. But if you remember Pirlo, for example, Pirlo started out as a number 10, and he wasn't bad. He was just not the world-class number 10.
Yeah.
And when you move him to a deep controller, where he can get more of the ball and have the whole pitch in front of him and pick teams to pieces, that's when Pirlo excelled. And it's not because he was a bad number 10, it's because his skill set made him world-class as being a deep controller, and probably just like a decent number 10 at Serie A level. And I think that's what you would get with Thiago. Is I'm not saying he couldn't do a job as a number 10. He could, but it would be that he would be doing a job. He wouldn't be world class. Whereas you've got a world class player controlling games, so let him do that, and just sign someone that can do the job you're wanting to shift Thiago into. He's never really done that in his career. Like, I was looking back, there was like one game I found where he played as a number 10 for Barcelona and actually got assists. And it was against some like non-league team, La Hospitalitat or something like that. I have no idea how to pronounce it. But yeah, it's like they won 9-1. It was some non-league team, and he played as a number 10 and destroyed them. But he's not Iniesta. He's Xavi. He's the guy that picks teams apart. He's not.
Fair. Stephen, I mean, I just want to end this by saying, I mean, I've been covering football here in India for almost 3 years now. Rubbing shoulders with probably the big names around the world. But this has been a pleasure. You've just been absolutely incredible. Thank you so much.
Thanks, I appreciate it. And this is doing great for my ego, by the way.
Nothing about that. I mean, and Stephen, this was absolutely fantastic. I mean, what Manas said, I can't repeat that enough. This has been absolutely brilliant.
My midfield for next season, I'm just going to end it by saying it's going to be Fabinho, Thiago, and Henderson. I don't think we're going to sign anyone. I think that's going to be our midfield next season. Nidhi, for you?
Yes, I think that, the fact that Henderson is the captain of the side, and, I agree with Stephen that, we'll have to probably think about phasing him out slowly. But whoever comes in will probably be bedded in as Klopp has shown throughout his years. So I tend to agree with that. It's going to be Fabinho, Thiago, and Henderson, at least for the start of the next season.
But I totally echo what Stephen said, that it's going to be either Thiago, Fabinho, and the third. The third person probably could be a new signing. Do let us know in the comment section which is your preferred go-to midfield as well. This is Menace and the Monk. Stephen, thank you so much once again. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.